you for sticking around for the Q&A. We're really excited to have Julie Cohen, the Oscar-nominated co-director of RBG and now the director of Everybody. We're very lucky to have River Gallo. Actor, screenwriter, and filmmaker in their own right. So I have a few questions prepared myself, and then if we have time, I'll open it up to the room. So go ahead and dive in. So Julie, I wanted to start by asking you to sort of share the evolution of the film. The idea began through your partnership with Dateline. You were looking, as you said, as we've spoken about before, for a jumping off point for an archival doc. And David Reimer was the story that you gravitated toward. And I'd love to know at what point it became very clear that this story, because that is a film in and of itself, but this story needed to be about the modern day movement.
Yeah, well, while the David Reimer Dr. Money story could be a film in itself, it would be a very, very bleak film. Which I have nothing necessarily against bleak films, but I actually prefer not to make them. I just like stories that have some, human spirit and oomph and fun and humor and music and all the things in this. Yes, not only Dateline in general, but Dateline specifically in the person of executive producer Liz Cole, who's here this evening, was really the genesis of this whole thought in the very early days of NBC News Studios of like, oh, what can we start getting through on? And then of course producer Molly O'Brien, who came to NBC News Studios a couple of years later, actually, after we'd been looking into this, and immediately was like, wait a second, that is like, sort of helped put juice behind getting more, seeing what we could do to make this a film. And the story was actually right there. The connection of this old case to intersex people and everything they've gone through over decades, and then the modern movement in which there is so much incredible stuff going on, a slice of which you saw in the film, and so many spectacular people who are just the sorts of people whose stories seem fun to tell.
And speaking of interesting and compelling stories, I've seen the film a few times now, luckily, and every time I watch it, the scenes with your mother are just, so powerful and so genuine. And I was wondering, you show such strength in those moments. When you were filming it, because there is a lot of joy, did you know how powerful those were going to be? I think that they speak to not just intersex people, not just queer people, anyone who's struggled to forgive or to have relationships with people in difficult situations. So I'm curious about, could you feel that at the time, and also what was it like watching that back?
First of all, it's so weird being here because I was watching Tar here. It's cool to be at the Angelika is what I'm trying to say. I remember shooting it and feeling like it was just kind of surreal to come to terms with my life being like the subject of a documentary by Oscar award-winning documentarian. And I honestly, it wasn't until I saw it at Tribeca and my mom was in the audience, and I saw that scene, and I completely like blanked on shooting a lot of the movie, just because we shot it in increments throughout a year and a half, and I needed to hear what I was saying to myself. Like me now needed to hear that because I needed to be reminded about what unconditional love was at this moment in my life. And then like there's my giant head like talking about it, and I'm like, whoa, movies are powerful. But like it's literally I said it, and Julie captured it, and this a really terrible answer to your question, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm still in the process of processing what this all means to me right now. And I think premiering it at Tribeca and having my mom tell me that, you know, she's never been prouder of me in my life, in her life, was just like a big milestone for me as a human, but also as like a filmmaker and artist and person trying to make intersex narratives in Hollywood that people can be truly moved by movies in a way that no other art form can do, and it's just a miracle, really.
And I did want to get your perspective as a filmmaker, because I also had the chance to speak with Alicia and Saifa, and we talked about sort of the public health and political perspectives of why intersex stories have been suppressed so often. But I think that you have a special window into, you know, through your own career, to why we don't see intersex stories on the screen. It's, you know, after this doc, it's really kind of a wake-up call. It makes you realize, like, have you ever really seen an intersex story, you know, portrayed on screen? So do you have insights where that starts? And, you know, what have you experienced things in your career that can speak to maybe why we don't see these stories on screen?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, intersex people really represent this middle space, and to a large degree, I think trans people also represent that just gray area, the unknown, the uncertainty of human existence up until now. Not that, you know, trans and intersex people have always existed, but now we're finally entering into the zeitgeist, and intersex people for the first time, like popular culture and popular discourse. And I think just uncertainty and makes people uncomfortable. Just all people, like on an existential level, I think. And so I think to a certain degree, we all feel a little allergic to what makes us uncomfortable, and what makes us feel uncertain. So, but I think that's starting to change, and I think people are starting to cultivate a greater intimacy with the unknown, or that's what I would advocate for. And I think what intersex people really do represent.
And Julie, thinking about sort of like the lack of representation on screen, you know, I was thinking about coming from making a doc like RBG, where people are coming up in so much background knowledge, I mean, to some extent, you know, but a familiarity with the topic. So to go from that to then making this doc where you're laying a lot of the foundation, how did you balance, because I think this is such a difficult thing in any art form, balance giving the knowledge we needed to be able to like understand the story versus over explaining and feeling didactic?
Right. I think I moved more than I might have expected going in towards like not only explaining, but explaining near the top. I just felt like, normally with a documentary, you really like the layers to sort of unfold because you're following this narrative and you're so into the story. And then like, yes, you sort of, the learning kind of happens organically throughout. And I was like, that is not gonna work for this. If we start following these people's lives and like our audience is like, what does intersex mean again? Like, what is this even about? Like, that's not gonna be good. It became pretty clear to me just from the dinner party conversation you have when you're working on a film, like, wow, people are pretty frickin' ignorant about just some basic definitions here. So that's when I realized, like, actually the top of the film is gonna be our three participants very quickly sort of describing what intersex means, and also we are gonna need a little bit of expert commentary. It was kind of clear to me from the beginning that I wanted our doctor expert to also be an intersex person, so we weren't creating that divide between like people with lived experience and like experts as necessarily separate, but I did think there were just gonna be some quick explainers. I mean, there's even, how when you're making a doc and there's or a television hour or whatever, there's enough people in this room that do that no, you've got your board full of, colored index cards, or actually, I now use something called Jamboard at Google Jamboard, that's the same thing, but digitally, I recommend it highly, but that's another thing. I'm not a paid spokesperson for Google Drive and other products. But anyway, among those colored, little squares, I had one that said intersex 101 and another that was intersex 102, like where we're gonna stick like some basic information that people are gonna need, because I really wanted to err on the side of viewers not feeling like swimming in a sea of confusion.
And coming from the outside, because I think when something's your lived experience, maybe nothing surprises you anymore. I think we can all relate to that, but coming from the outside of this experience, from the intersex experience, Julie, were there things that you encountered along the way that really shocked you? I mean, we hear a lot about the institutional silencing in the film. So I'm curious, as someone from the outside, is that something that you saw firsthand just making the doc?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked, stunned, surprised, and mind blown at every turn working on this film, which seemed like a really good sign to me, because it's like, oh, we're blowing my mind, and like, I think we're gonna blow the minds of audiences also. Two moments that come to mind. One would be seeing Saifa's medical records, seeing that the form itself, never mind before it being filled out, but the form itself in the 1970s in a New York hospital said, sex, male, female, or ambiguous. Like those are the boxes that exist on the form. So obviously, obstetrics wards understand that ambiguous is a potential way that a baby might be born. And then the further checking ambiguous, crossing that off, and checking female, like that was a pretty that was stunning to see. I was also this seems like, oh, not this the best journalistic documentary research, but the moment when River with a bullhorn is explaining at the protest what your childhood and youth experience, the actual surgical procedure that was done, was the moment that our team learned it as well. That was our second day of filming. And that I was, the information was surprising and upsetting, but the power of you speaking it bravely and loudly felt like such a moment that the thing you worry about when you're making a verite doc, like, oh, what's gonna be the big moment? Like, where's it gonna? I was like, oh, look, there, we got a big moment, Frag 3, right there. River was not at this point a character in our film yet, so it was after that I approached them and said, like, I mean, you were aware that a doc was being made, but like that was just sort of like a thing going on in the background. So that's when we then talked about doing interviews, etc.
Yeah, I think last time we spoke, you commented that River on camera was just sort of I mean, you feel that in person, but just sort of hard to look away from, right? And that was kind of like one of the things.
Well, the interesting thing was I didn't know they were an actor, and yet, like, you know, that still there was a whole, I don't know, you've quoted me saying this in a way that maybe you don't love it, but like that they kind of popped on Kathy. You popped.
I said popped.
So they popped, really popped. You know, and when you look at the, you know, if you're looking at footage within the day or two of filming, as I usually do, like looking at the footage from the poster day, it's like, wow, this is, you know, this is a person that is without knowing it perhaps, but is volunteering to be one of the stars of the film.
And I'll open it up in just a moment, but I wanted to make it a little fun. I don't know if this is like traditional fun, but I was listening to WNYC this afternoon, and there was a segment with Jinx Monsoon, and Terry Gross actually asked her, and it made me think of you because it was such like a powerful thing to hear. Asked Jinx Monsoon what people could actually do to be allies, you know, in a climate where there's so much legislation and that's the least of it really. So to follow in Jinx Monsoon's foot tracks, do you have advice? Like, what would you tell people? What's the best way to actually be an ally to intersex people and trans people and queer people? Like, you know, I think you have a really unique perspective.
I think on a base level right now, intersex people, it is exhausting to do the 101 work and to just, you know, be explaining things to people. We need non-intersex people to do that legwork for us so that we could have the energy and the resources to, you know, make intersex art, fight legislation, create educational programs. So I think on a base level, people just need to tell other people what it means to be intersex. And a really easy way to do that is tell your friends to go watch Everybody, opening in theaters June 30th. No, but seriously, like it's not lost on me that a company like Focus is distributing this nationwide in 250 theaters across the country. People have no excuse not to be allies to the intersex community by literally showing up to a movie theater and watching a good movie. Like, what?
With very
Just
good
do it.
music too.
Yeah, it's fun.
Okay, do we have a moment for a few questions? Does anyone have a question? All right, I already see a hand up there.
Hi. Julie, you mentioned your sort of educational process through the making of this film. And it's not lost on us that also the subjects, River and the other two folks, also had some moments portrayed in the film where they themselves were educated. What was that like for you, River, to learn about some of the history that Julie brought to you? And also the second part of the question is, your relationship with your mom, as moving as it was portrayed, but what about with your dad?
Damn.
If you want to answer.
No, I'm like, other people have daddy issues here or something? They're like, ooh, what? I love my dad. Thank you for that question. I had known about Dr. Money. I had known of the Reimer case. I had never seen the Dateline footage until Julie showed it to us and you saw it on camera. I just think it's horrific beyond belief. Like, it's truly one of the most tragic stories I've ever heard because, like Saifa said in the documentary, like, it didn't have to be that way. He wasn't even intersex. Like, it just, the levels of horror and like hubris and like, you know, evil doctor. It was truly mind-boggling to me and still is. And it was one of the things when I saw the movie at Tribeca opening day or for our premiere that made me cry, just because you could see it in his face that he just, his life was ruined by this person, and subsequently so many other people's lives were ruined based on this fallacy that this experiment had gone right when it went horribly wrong. So that made me have a greater respect and appreciation for David's life and what he and Ned essentially in the end like was trying to fight for intersex people. Yes, my father. My father was he's alive. He was a big part of my journey growing up in intersex as well. I was actually telling Julie on the car ride to our screening in LA a few days ago how I don't know, my mom has been such a big ally to me in my gender journey, and my father was definitely a little bit more complicated. However, in my early adolescence, when my parents were making these doctor visits, it was my dad actually who was making the appointments and speaking to the doctors, because my mom doesn't really speak English and my dad does, and there was a lot of desperation in him to try to help me when I was younger. And you don't see that here in this documentary, but he was a real, he suffered a lot from the toll of kind of being in the dark and not knowing how to help me or what to do to help me. And as I, then came out as non-binary and trans, things got like weird. But my dad and I, like, our relationship is getting better and better, and he really does like love me and accept me. Like, he picks me up at the airport now whenever I come to New Jersey, and I'm like, oh wow, like it's just sweet. And I'm really glad that I could offer both my parents that grace and forgiveness, and that our relationships are changing.
And I think we'll do,
Oh.
and I think we'll do one more and then call it. Cindy.
Hi, that was great. I really enjoyed it. Great work, Julie. I was just curious about the Berlin exhibit. How did that get on your radar? At what point did that get on your radar?
Yeah, so the question was about the exhibit in Berlin. Yeah, so I had actually, because we wanted to do filming with each of the participants kind of a bit in their home environment, as well as some of these, situations where they gather together, I was actually getting ready to go film with Saifa in Manchester, England, where he lives. And we were planning the logistics of a shoot that was coming up. And he said to me, like, well, as long as you're like in Europe, like maybe we could also go to Berlin, because there's an art exhibit about intersex people, and that there's nude photo of me and pictured in, and I really would be eager to see the exhibit, and maybe this could be a way. And as soon as he said it, I was like, that sounds amazing. Now the production logistics and costs, we actually couldn't do both. Like I was like, I couldn't have a crew that was going to be going from one place to the other. But that seemed better than anything I had in mind in Manchester, and I was like, great, let's meet in Berlin. And it was one of my favorite parts of the film, both in the making of it and what came across on screen. I think it came out maybe in some ways a bit different than I had expected, because I had expected it was going to be a celebratory moment, and actually, as you saw, it was a lot more complicated than that. But like that, that's the beautiful thing of making docs versus narrative films. Like things are happening in people's lives, and as River said, we were filming this total over about a year and a half, and so not that much. I mean, I think we had a total of 26 shoot days, so it's not like we were filming constantly. But in the meantime, I'm keeping in touch with all three of them and kind of hearing things that are coming up. And if something seems like it might be cool, then we would go and film it. And that was an example of just, a place where I felt very honored to be, and then I'm glad that we could bring it to the screen.
Well, thank you so much. One more round of applause.